Zinnia Zephyr's wild laughter echoed across the plains as she raced her Palomino mare at breakneck speed. Her long auburn hair streaming behind her like a banner of defiance against the dying light of the 1875 Wyoming Territory sunset. The local townsfolk of Whispering Creek had long ago decided she was untamable, a 22-year-old woman who refused to be confined by the expectations society had placed upon her slender shoulders. The dust settled in her wake as she finally slowed her horse at the edge of her father's property. Zinnia patted the mare's sweaty neck, her breathing as labored as the horse's. "That's my girl, Starlight," she murmured, leaning down to press her cheek against the warm hide. "We showed them all again, didn't we?" the mare nickered softly, as if in agreement. Zinnia straightened in the saddle, surveying the sprawling ranch her father had built from nothing. Henry Zephyr had been gone 2 years now, leaving her to manage their modest cattle operation with only a handful of hired hands. Most had quit within months, unable to take orders from a woman, especially one who rode astride like a man, wore trousers beneath her split skirts, and could outshoot most cowboys in the territory. As she guided Starlight toward the barn, Zinnia spotted an unfamiliar figure leaning against the corral fence. His tall frame was relaxed, but there was something watchful in his posture that put her immediately on alert. Her hand instinctively moved to the small pistol tucked into her belt. The stranger straightened as she approached. He pushed back his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, with piercing blue eyes that assessed her with frank curiosity rather than the judgment she was accustomed to. "Miss Zephyr, I presume." His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that placed him from somewhere further south. "Who's asking?" Zinnia remained mounted, giving herself the advantage of height. "Name's Dawson Hawkins. Your neighbor Chester Miller suggested I come see you about work." He gestured toward the north. "I just bought the old Ferguson place." Zinnia raised an eyebrow. The Ferguson property had been abandoned for nearly 3 years, the homestead falling into disrepair after the family had given up and moved back east. "Mr. Miller has no business sending drifters my way." She studied him more carefully. His clothes were worn but clean, his boots of good quality. "Besides, that property's more trouble than it's worth." "I don't mind trouble, madam, or hard work." His eyes held her steadily without the usual male appraisal that made her skin crawl. "And I'm no drifter. I've come to stay." Something about his direct manner made Zinnia pause. She was about to dismiss him when she caught sight of her depleted cattle herd grazing in the distance. The truth was, she desperately needed help. Winter would arrive before long, and there was still so much to be done. "Can you mend fences, Mr. Hawkins? Been doing it most of my life one way or another. And cattle, you know how to handle them." Drove herds up from Texas 3 seasons running. Zinnia dismounted in one fluid motion, landing lightly on her feet. Up close, she realized Dawson Hawkins was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30 at most. "I can't pay much," she said bluntly. "I didn't ask how much." He extended his hand. "Just looking to be neighborly." She hesitated, then took his calloused palm in hers. His grip was firm but not crushing the handshake of a man who had nothing to prove. "Trial basis," she declared. "1 week. If you don't work out, you move on. Fair enough." A slight smile touched the corners of his mouth. "When do I start?" "Sunrise tomorrow." She turned to lead Starlight into the barn. "Don't be late, Mr. Hawkins." As she began unsaddling her mare, she was surprised to find him beside her, hands ready to help. "I can manage," she said stiffly. "Never doubted it." He stepped back respectfully. "Just thought you might want to get to your supper sooner. Sun's nearly down." Zinnia paused, brush in hand. No one had offered simple kindness in so long that she hardly knew how to respond. Finally, she nodded and handed him the brush. "Starlight doesn't take to strangers easily," she warned. Dawson approached the mare slowly, murmuring softly. To Zinnia's astonishment, Starlight lowered her head and allowed him to stroke her neck. "Magnificent animal," he said appreciatively. "Arabian blood. My father brought her dam from Kentucky before I was born." They worked in companionable silence for several minutes, the rhythm of the grooming almost hypnotic in the gathering dusk. "Why'd you buy the Ferguson place?" Zinnia finally asked. "It's mostly rock and scrub." "Has good water," he replied, "and I've got ideas about what might grow there. Dreams don't feed a man in Wyoming Territory. Maybe not." He hung the brush on its hook, "but they give him a reason to get up in the morning." Their eyes met across Starlight's back, and for an inexplicable moment, Zinnia felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest. She quickly looked away. "Sunrise," she reminded him tersely. "Main house, I'll have coffee ready." Dawson settled his hat more firmly on his head. "Yes, madam." "I'll be here." She watched him stride away into the gathering darkness, his silhouette straight and sure against the purpling sky. Something about his quiet confidence unsettled her more than any man's swagger ever had. True to his word, Dawson arrived before the sun had fully crested the eastern hills. Zinnia had been up for an hour already, the aroma of strong coffee and frying bacon filling the small kitchen. She glanced up as his shadow darkened the doorway. "Coffee's hot," she said by way of greeting, gesturing to the pot on the stove. He removed his hat before entering, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Thank you kindly." As he poured himself a cup, Zinnia set a plate of bacon and eggs on the rough-hewn table. "Eat," she ordered. "Day's wasting." If her brusque manner bothered him, he didn't show it. They ate quickly, the silence broken only by the occasional clink of cutlery against crockery. Zinnia used the time to study him more carefully. His movements were economical, precise. A man who didn't waste energy on flourishes. "North pasture fence needs mending," she told him as she cleared their plates. "We lost 30 head last spring when it came down in the rains. Show me where the supplies are and I'll get started." She led him to the tool shed, pointing out the stacks of lumber and coils of wire. "Take whatever you need. There's a bay gelding in the corral, you can use the one with the white star." "Thunder?" Dawson looked surprised. "Chester told me that horse hasn't let anyone ride him since your father passed." Zinnia stiffened. "Chester Miller talks too much. And how do you know my father's horse's name? Small towns have long memories and longer tongues." He selected tools with practiced hands. "I don't have to take Thunder, I brought my own mount." "No, take him." Zinnia's chin lifted stubbornly. "If you can handle him, that is." A flicker of amusement crossed Dawson's face. "Is everything a test with you, Miss Zephyr?" "Life is a test, Mr. Hawkins. Those who fail don't last long out here." "Can't argue with that." He gathered the supplies. "I'll have that fence mended before sundown." As good as his word, Dawson returned as the sky was beginning to flame with sunset colors. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his face streaked with dirt, but there was quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "North fence is secure," he reported, dismounting from Thunder. To Zinnia's amazement, the temperamental gelding stood calmly beside him, none of the usual prancing and snorting that characterized his behavior with strangers. "I reinforced the western corner where the ground slopes. It'll hold better in the next heavy rain. You thought of that on your own." Zinnia couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "It's what I would have done on my own land." He led Thunder to the water trough. "Horse did well. We came to an understanding." "Seems you have a way with difficult creatures," Zinnia observed. Dawson's gaze met hers, unexpectedly direct. "I believe most creatures only become difficult when they're misunderstood or mistreated." His words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that Zinnia wasn't prepared to acknowledge. She turned abruptly toward the house. "Supper's ready when you've cleaned up," she called over her shoulder. "There's a pump out back." Days stretched into weeks, and Dawson proved himself invaluable. He mended fences, repaired the leaking roof on the barn, and helped round up strays from the higher pastures. His quiet competence chipped away at Zinnia's carefully constructed defenses. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch after a long day of work, Zinnia found herself asking the question that had nagged at her since his arrival. Why here, Dawson? Why buy land in the middle of nowhere when you could have gone anywhere? He was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains gilded by the setting sun. "I was a Union cavalry scout during the war," he finally said. "Saw things no man should see, did things that haunt me still." His voice was steady, but she could hear the underlying pain. "After I drifted, Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, nothing felt right. Then I passed through here last spring, saw that abandoned homestead with the mountains behind it and something." He shook his head. "Something told me this was where I could finally stop running." Zinnia absorbed his words, understanding for the first time the shadows that sometimes darkened his eyes. "My father fought too," she said softly. "Came back changed. That's why we moved west, away from everything that reminded him of the fighting. Did it help? Some." She traced the grain of the wooden armrest with her fingertip. "The nightmares never fully went away, but he said the open sky made it easier to breathe. Your father was a wise man." Dawson's voice was gentle. "Is that why you stayed, after he passed?" "Partly." She hesitated. "Also because everyone expected me to fail, to give up and marry some shopkeeper in town who's been circling like a vulture, waiting for me to realize I can't manage on my own. And you're too stubborn to give them the satisfaction." A reluctant smile curved her lips. "Something like that. For what it's worth," Dawson said quietly, "I've never seen anyone, man or woman, more capable of handling whatever life throws at them." Their eyes met in the fading light, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had both fought against expectations and loss. As autumn deepened, bringing frosty mornings and golden afternoons, Zinnia found herself looking forward to Dawson's daily arrivals. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side, their conversations becoming less guarded. The town, however, had noticed. Gossip spread like wildfire, and not all of it was kind. Zinnia was selecting supplies at the general store when she overheard two women whispering behind a display of canned goods. "That Zephyr girl has the Hawkins man working for her now," one said with clear disapproval. "Living out there all alone with him. Scandalous." "Well, what can you expect from a woman who dresses like a man and rides like a savage?" her companion replied. "My Herbert says she's too wild to ever make a proper wife. Such a shame. Her poor mother would be heartbroken to see what's become of her." Zinnia's cheeks burned with humiliation and anger. She'd heard such talk before, but somehow it stung more now. She slammed her basket onto the counter, startling the shopkeeper. "I'll take these," she said tersely. "And you can tell Mrs. Willoughby and Mrs. Jenkins that if they have something to say about me, they should say it to my face." The ride home was a blur of hurt pride and frustrated tears she refused to shed. By the time she reached the ranch, her emotions had hardened into resolve. She would prove them all wrong. She didn't need anyone, especially not Dawson Hawkins with his quiet strength and disarming smile. When he arrived the next morning, she was coldly efficient. "I won't be needing your help anymore, Mr. Hawkins." She kept her back to him as she spoke, focusing on the ledger before her. "I can manage from here." A long silence followed her announcement. When Dawson finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "May I ask what changed between yesterday and today?" "Nothing changed. I simply realized it's time I handled things on my own again." "I see." He didn't move from the doorway. "Is this about what people in town are saying?" Zinnia's head snapped up. "You've heard, it's a small place. Hard not to hear." His expression remained gentle, without judgment. "Does their opinion matter so much?" "Of course not," she retorted, but her voice lacked conviction. "I just don't want to be the subject of their gossip." "Zinnia." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her heart stutter. "Those people will talk regardless of what you do. The only question is whether you'll let their small-mindedness dictate your choices." His words struck her with unexpected force, echoing her father's advice from years ago. She turned away, fighting the sudden sting of tears. "I've managed alone before. I can do it again. No one's questioning your ability." He took a step closer. "But there's no shame in accepting help, in allowing someone to stand beside you." "Is that what you're doing, standing beside me?" she faced him, suddenly needing to understand his motives. "Why, Dawson, why have you stayed all these weeks?" His gaze didn't waver. "At first because I saw someone who needed help but was too proud to ask for it. Then because I admired your strength, your determination." He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. "And now, because I can't imagine starting my day without seeing you." The simple honesty of his admission left her speechless. Before she could gather her thoughts, he continued, "I'll go if that's what you truly want, but know that it has nothing to do with thinking you incapable." Zinnia stood frozen, caught between fear and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. She'd kept everyone at a distance for so long, convinced that needing another person was a weakness she couldn't afford. "I don't know what I want," she finally whispered, the admission costing her dearly. Dawson nodded as if her confusion was perfectly understandable. "Then I'll give you time to figure it out." He settled his hat on his head. "I'll be at my place when you decide." He left her standing in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of the ranch suddenly seeming hollow in his absence. The days that followed were some of the longest of Zinnia's life. She threw herself into work, exhausting herself with tasks that would normally have been shared. Each night, she fell into bed too tired to think, only to find herself staring at the ceiling, replaying Dawson's words. A week after he'd left, an early winter storm swept across the valley. Zinnia fought to secure the cattle in the lower pastures, struggling against driving sleet and howling wind. As darkness fell, she realized with growing alarm that several calves were missing, soaked to the skin and shivering violently. She saddled Starlight once more. The mare balked at returning to the storm, but Zinnia had no choice. Those calves represented next year's herd, her future. She'd barely reached the tree line when Starlight's footing gave way on the muddy slope. Horse and rider tumbled down the embankment, landing in the swollen creek below. The icy water knocked the breath from Zinnia's lungs as she struggled to free herself from the stirrups. Starlight scrambled to her feet, whinnying in distress, but Zinnia's leg was trapped beneath her. Pain shot through her ankle as she pulled free. She clung to a boulder, the frigid current threatening to sweep her away. Through the driving sleet, she could see Starlight making her way up the bank, reins trailing. "Go home, girl," she gasped, hoping the horse's instinct would lead her back to the ranch. It was her only hope of rescue. Time lost meaning as Zinnia fought to stay conscious. The cold penetrated to her bones, her sodden clothing offering no protection. She thought of Dawson, of all the things left unsaid between them, of how foolish she'd been to send away the one person who had seen her for who she truly was. As darkness closed in around her, she thought she heard hoofbeats approaching. A hallucination, surely her mind's final gift before hypothermia claimed her. Then strong arms were lifting her from the water, a familiar voice cutting through her confusion. "Zinnia, stay with me, darlin'. Stay with me." Dawson cradled her against his chest, his warmth a shocking contrast to her frozen limbs. She tried to speak, but her lips were too numb to form words. "Starlight came to my place," he explained, wrapping her in his coat. "Smart horse, knew exactly where to go." He lifted her onto his horse, mounting behind her to keep her secure in the saddle. The journey back to her ranch passed in a blur of pain and intermittent awareness. Zinnia drifted in and out of consciousness, anchored only by the solid strength of Dawson's arms around her and the steady cadence of his voice in her ear, urging her to hold on. At the ranch, he carried her inside and worked quickly to build up the fire. With gentle efficiency, he removed her wet clothing, wrapping her in layers of blankets before tending to her injured ankle. "It's not broken," he told her, his hands careful as they examined the swelling. "Badly sprained, though. You won't be riding for a while." Zinnia watched his face through half-closed eyes, noting the worry etched in the lines around his mouth. "The calves," she murmured. "Have to find them. Already taken care of." Dawson pressed a cup of hot tea into her hands. "Found them huddled under the outcropping near the east fence. Got them into the barn before I went looking for you." Relief washed over her. How did you know where to look for the calves or for you? A faint smile touched his lips. I've been watching your herd patterns for weeks now. As for you, I know you wouldn't leave any animal to face a storm alone. It's not in your nature. Zinnia stared into the depths of her tea, overcome by the realization that this man understood her better than anyone ever had. She raised her eyes to meet his. Why did you come back? Never really left, he admitted. Been checking on you from a distance. Making sure you were all right. I wasn't, she whispered. All right, I mean, not without you. Dawson knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Zinnia, I don't care what the town thinks. I don't care if they call you wild or unsuitable or any other foolish thing. I care about you. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The things they say are nothing compared to what I know. His gaze held hers, unwavering. I know your strength, your kindness to animals, your determination to honor your father's legacy. I know how the corner of your mouth quirks up when you're trying not to smile at something I've said. His voice softened. I know that I want to spend my days with you if you'll have me. Zinnia felt the last of her defenses crumbling. I've never needed anyone before, she confessed. It terrifies me. Needing someone doesn't make you weak. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. It just means you've found something worth holding onto. With trembling fingers, she reached out to touch his face. Stay, she whispered. Please stay. His answer was to draw her gently into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. As winter blanketed the Wyoming Territory in pristine white, Zinnia and Dawson found a rhythm together that defied the town's expectations. They merged their operations, his expertise in crops complementing her knowledge of cattle. The Ferguson place was gradually transformed, its neglected fields cleared and prepared for spring planting. The town's gossip continued, but its sting had lost its power. Zinnia found herself smiling more, laughing freely in a way she hadn't since her father's death. Dawson's steady presence beside her gave her the courage to lower the walls she'd built around her heart. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire in her father's house, now truly their home, Dawson presented her with a small wooden box. I've been working on this in the evenings, he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. It's not fancy, but… Inside lay a delicately carved ring, fashioned from a piece of walnut wood and inlaid with a tiny silver star. It's beautiful, she breathed, running her finger over the smooth surface. It's temporary, he explained, until I can get to Cheyenne for a proper one. But I couldn't wait that long to ask. He took her hand, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Zinnia Zephyr, I knew from the moment I saw you racing across the plains that you were unlike any woman I'd ever met. You've shown me that it's possible to start again, to build something meaningful after loss. I love your wildness, your fierce heart, your unwavering courage. His voice deepened with emotion. Will you marry me? Tears blurred her vision as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. When she found her voice, it was steady and sure. Yes, Dawson Hawkins. Yes. He slipped the wooden ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was a promise of partnership, of understanding, of a love built on mutual respect. They were married in the spring of 1876, with wildflowers carpeting the prairie and new life stirring in the fields Dawson had carefully prepared. The ceremony was small, attended by a few neighboring ranchers who had come to respect the unconventional couple. To everyone's surprise, many of the townspeople came as well. Perhaps they'd been won over by Dawson and Zinnia's success, or perhaps they simply couldn't resist witnessing the union of the woman they'd once declared too wild to love and the quiet cowboy who had proven them wrong. As Zinnia stood beside her husband, she caught sight of Mrs. Willoughby and Mrs. Jenkins whispering together. This time, however, their expressions held something that looked remarkably like admiration. Seems we've given them something new to talk about, she murmured to Dawson. His arm tightened around her waist. Let them talk. We've got more important things to do. Like what? She asked, tilting her face up to his. Like building a life together. He smiled down at her, love evident in every line of his face. Like proving that sometimes, the wildest hearts make the most faithful companions. As they rode home together across the land that now belonged to both of them, Zinnia felt a sense of peace she'd never thought possible. The wild girl who had raced across these plains alone had found someone willing to ride beside her, not to tame her spirit, but to cherish it. They crested the hill overlooking their properties, now unified into a single promising expanse. The setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and amber, a fitting backdrop for their new beginning. "Race you home," Zinnia challenged, her eyes sparkling with the joy that had become a constant in her life since Dawson had entered it. He laughed, the sound carrying on the spring breeze. "Lead the way, Mrs. Hawkins. I'll be right beside you." And as they galloped toward home, Dawson kept his promise, riding beside the woman who had once been called too wild to love, matching her pace for pace, his presence a testament to the power of acceptance, understanding, and a love strong enough to embrace even the wildest of hearts.